There is a moment every narcissist dreads more than losing you, more than losing money or status. It is not the moment you scream at them or cry or even walk out the door. It is the moment you look at them and feel absolutely nothing at all. Because in that moment, whatever has been living inside them, feeding off your fear and your endless need for their approval, suddenly realizes it has nothing left to eat. And a starving thing does not stay calm. A starving thing panics. A starving thing shows its true face. That is what we are talking about today. Not the mask the narcissist wears when they want something from you, but the face underneath it. The one that only appears when they sense they are losing their grip. If you have ever wondered why someone who once ignored you for days suddenly cannot stop calling, why someone who once smiled sweetly at your pain suddenly explodes over nothing, why someone who insisted they never needed anyone suddenly seems terrified of being alone, you are about to understand exactly what you witnessed. Stay until the end, because the last sign is the one almost nobody talks about, and it proves beyond doubt that you were never the weak one in this story. Let's start with a question most people never think to ask. What does a narcissist actually run on? Not love, because love requires vulnerability, and vulnerability is the one thing they cannot survive. Not hatred either, because hatred would mean you matter to them as a person. What they run on is reaction, your fear, your tears, your desperate attempts to fix what was never yours to fix. Every reaction is a small transfer of power from you to them, and they have built their entire identity on collecting that power one moment at a time. This is why the beginning always feels like magic. They were not falling in love with you. They were studying you, learning your wounds, the exact places where you doubt yourself most. And once they knew the map, they used it gently at first, then with less mercy, until you were no longer sure which thoughts in your own head were actually yours. But here is what almost nobody explains, and it changes everything. That entire system only works as long as you keep reacting. The instant you stop, the structure begins to collapse from the inside. Not because you fought back or delivered some perfect comeback, but simply because you stopped feeding it. A thing that has only ever survived on someone else's energy does not know how to exist without it, so it panics. It performs. It escalates. And once you know what you are looking at, every one of those panic performances becomes a confession instead of a threat. The first sign is sudden, disproportionate rage. Not anger tied to something real, but rage that erupts over a tone of voice, a late reply, a boundary stated so calmly you almost didn't notice you'd set one. That rage was never really about what you did. It was about what you stopped doing. You stopped flinching. You stopped over-explaining. You stopped shrinking to make the moment easier for them. Something that has only ever controlled others through fear does not know a second language. When charm fails, it reaches for intimidation. When intimidation fails, it reaches for chaos, because chaos still feels like control. But watch closely. Underneath that rage is not strength. It is the sound of something losing its only source of food. The second sign is the opposite, and somehow colder. Sudden withdrawal, the silence with no explanation. The stare that looks straight through you. To anyone untrained, this looks like indifference. But real indifference does not announce itself this precisely. This silence is a test, a hook baited with your own old wound. The fear of being unloved, unchosen, unseen. It is designed to make you chase. And if you do not, if you let the silence sit there unanswered, you have proven that their absence does not break you. That single realization is the exact thing their identity was built to prevent you from discovering. So they wait, expecting the old version of you to come crawling back. And when it doesn't, something in them starts to unravel. The third sign is blame that arrives dressed as an argument, but is closer to an exorcism, an attempt to force something out of you and put something else back in. Suddenly, every problem traces back to you. Your tone caused their cruelty. Your distrust caused their lies. None of this is really about fault. It is an attempt to reinstall the old software, the guilt, the shame, the self-doubt, because a version of you that no longer carries that weight is one they cannot touch. Our freedom in someone they once controlled is the outcome their entire performance was built to prevent. Then comes the fourth sign, the one most people mistake for an attack when it is actually a surrender, the smear campaign. When the silence didn't bring you back and the rage didn't shake you, they turn outward. Friends hear a different version of you. Family receives carefully edited stories. You become the unstable one, the cold one, the one who changed for no reason. It feels like betrayal, and it is, but it is not evidence of their strength. It is evidence of their desperation. If they can convince the world you are the problem, some part of them still hopes they can convince you of it too. If any of this feels uncomfortably familiar, stay with me, because we are only getting started. What comes next finally answers the question you have probably been asking for a long time. Not what is wrong with them, but why, if every single person they could have chosen in this entire world, it was you, specifically and deliberately, that they chose. Here is the answer nobody gives you, and it is not the one you expect. They did not choose you because you were weak. They chose you because you were warm, because you still believed people meant what they said, because you gave second chances the way other people give spare change, easily, without keeping score. A person like that could never build anything real inside themselves, because whatever should have grown there, the security, the wholeness, the quiet sense of being enough, never took root, so instead they learned to attach to something already glowing. They did not fall in love with you. They found a source of light and moved in close enough to warm themselves by it. That is not a flaw in you. It is evidence of exactly how much you have to give. They simply learned, long before they ever met you, how to take without offering anything back that could survive daylight. This is the part almost nobody says out loud, so let's say it plainly. What you were dealing with was never really a person defending themselves. It was a performance defending its stage. Somewhere underneath the arrogance, the coldness, the sudden bursts of charm switched on and off like a light in a hallway, there is something small and frightened that has never once felt safe, simply existing as it is. That fear is old. It is usually older than you. It came from somewhere long before your name entered their story. A childhood where love was conditional, or absent, or so unpredictable that the only way to survive it was to build a mask strong enough to fool everyone, including, eventually, themselves. That does not excuse what they did to you. It explains it. And there is a difference between understanding a storm and standing in the rain waiting for it to apologize. Now contrast that with what actually happened the moment you stopped playing your part. You did not become cruel, or you did not become cold, you became still. And stillness to something that survives entirely on your reaction is the single most unbearable sound in the world. Silence, when it comes from you instead of them, does not feel like peace to them. It feels like disappearance, like the stage lights going out mid-performance while the audience is still watching. This is why the moment you truly detach, not the fake detachment you perform to provoke a reaction, but the real, quiet, uninterested kind, is the moment everything shifts. You are not doing anything to them. You are simply no longer doing anything for them. And the difference between those two things is the entire story. Let's talk about the fifth sign now, because this is where it gets interesting. The love bombing returns, not the sweet, hopeful version from the very beginning, but a frantic, almost desperate echo of it. Flowers that arrive without a reason. Long messages remembering things you barely remember yourself. Sudden promises of change, of therapy, of becoming a completely different person. If only you will come back and press play on the relationship one more time. It looks like remorse. It is not remorse. Remorse requires the ability to sit with discomfort and grow from it. What you are witnessing instead is a supply shortage being treated like an emergency. They are not trying to become better. They are trying to reopen the account they had access to before you closed it. And here is how you know the difference. Genuine change happens quietly over time, without an audience, without a deadline attached to your return. What you're seeing instead has a deadline. It needs you back before the growth even has to happen, because the growth was never actually the plan. The sixth sign is something people mistake for maturity, and it might be the most convincing performance of all. Sudden, calm indifference. After the rage and the silence and the guilt and the love bombing all fail to bring you back, some of them switch to something that looks almost like peace. They will tell mutual friends they are doing wonderful. They will post evidence of a full, thriving life. They will act as though your absence barely registered at all. This, more than anything else on this list, is designed for exactly one audience, and that audience is you. It is meant to reach you secondhand through someone who will mention it in passing, so that you wonder if perhaps you were replaceable after all. But notice the effort involved in appearing unaffected. Actual indifference does not require staging. A person who truly does not care does not construct and exhibit proving it. By now you may notice something these six signs all share. Every single one of them is a reaction to your absence, not an expression of their strength. Rage is not power, it is panic wearing power's clothing. Withdrawal is not indifference, it is punishment for a crime you did not commit, the crime of surviving without them. Blame is not confidence, it is an attempt to hand you back a weight they no longer want to carry. The smear campaign is not influence, it is the last, loudest gasp of someone who feels the ground disappearing beneath them. The sudden return of affection is not love, it is hunger disguised as change. And the performance of peace is not healing, it is theater built for an audience of exactly one, and that audience has always been you. Here is where most people stop the story, satisfied that they finally understand the mechanics of what happened to them. But understanding the mechanics is not the same as understanding the meaning, and the meaning is what actually sets you free. So stay with me, because what comes next is not about them anymore. It is about the version of you standing on the other side of all of this, the one they were never built to survive. Let's talk about the meaning now, because this is the part that changes the way you carry this experience for the rest of your life. Whatever you want to call what was living inside them, a wound, a pattern, a spirit, a hunger with no name, it operated on one single law, and that law was simple. It could only survive inside a room where someone else supplied the light. That is not a metaphor for effect. It is the literal mechanism of how control works. A person who is whole does not need to extract wholeness from someone else. They simply have it. The fact that they needed yours, needed your fear, your guilt, your endless second chances, tells you something they never wanted you to know. They were never the strong one in the room. They were the one who could not survive without a source. You were the source. And a source does not need permission to stop giving. This is where most healing content gets it backwards. It tells you the goal is to expose them, to make sure everyone finally sees who they really are, to win some final argument they have been avoiding for years. But exposure was never the exit. Exposure is still a form of reaching toward them, still a way of needing them to see you, to admit it, to feel sorry. And needing anything from them, even their admission of guilt, keeps a thread connected between you and the very thing you are trying to walk away from. The real exit has nothing to do with them at all. It is the moment you stop needing anything from that direction, including closure, including apology, including the satisfaction of watching them finally understand what they did. That moment does not look dramatic from the outside. It looks like silence, but it is the most powerful silence you will ever hold. Here is a contrast worth sitting with. Revenge feels like power, but it keeps you standing in their story, performing a role they wrote for you a long time ago. Healing feels like nothing at first, quiet, almost anticlimactic, and that is exactly why it terrifies them more than revenge ever could. Revenge can be twisted into a narrative about your bitterness. It gives them something to point to, something to use with mutual friends, more proof that you are the unstable one, the vindictive one, the one who could not simply move on. But healing cannot be spun into anything. There is no story they can tell about your peace that makes them look better. A calm life is not a weapon they can turn back on you, because a calm life does not require an audience to be real. Let's talk about boundaries for a moment, because this is where people get stuck the longest. You were taught, maybe by them, maybe by circumstances long before them, that setting a boundary is an act of conflict, something that requires justification, something you should feel guilty about the moment you do it. But a boundary was never an attack. A boundary is closer to a mirror. It does not reach out and hurt anyone. It simply reflects back exactly what someone is and whether they are willing to respect the person standing in front of them. A person capable of real intimacy sees a boundary and adjusts, sometimes uncomfortably, but they adjust. A person who has only ever survived through control sees the same boundary and experiences it as a small death, because for the first time, the room contains someone who is no longer available for consumption. That reaction was never about the boundary itself. It was about what the boundary revealed. You might be asking yourself now why any of this matters, why understanding the mechanics of someone else's fear should be worth your time at all, when what you really want is simply to stop hurting. Here is the honest answer. Understanding this does not erase the pain. Nothing erases the pain instantly, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. What understanding this does is take the pain out of the dark. It gives it a shape you can finally look at directly instead of flinching away from. And once pain has a shape, it stops controlling you from the shadows. You stop asking what is wrong with me and start asking what happened to me, and that shift changes everything that follows. There is a particular kind of grief that comes with this, and almost nobody prepares you for it. It is not grief for the relationship. You will stop missing that faster than you expect, because what you were missing was mostly the beginning, the version that never really existed past the first months. The real grief is for the years, for the version of you that spent so long trying to be quieter, smaller, easier to love, more forgiving, more patient, more understanding, in the hope that it would finally be enough. That grief deserves space. Do not rush past it. Do not perform healing before you have actually done any of it. Sit with the loss honestly, because a grief that is acknowledged moves through you, and a grief that is buried simply waits for another opportunity to resurface, usually in your next relationship wearing a different face. But grief, however necessary, is not the final destination. It is a corridor you walk through, not a room you live in forever. And on the other side of that corridor is something almost nobody warns you about, something that arrives so quietly you might miss it if you are not paying attention. It is the day you realize you have gone an entire week without thinking about them. Then a month, and eventually you realize the silence in your life is no longer something you are enduring. It is something you built on purpose for yourself, and it belongs entirely to you. So let's return to where we started tonight, back to that single truth we opened with. The moment they fear most is not your anger. It is not your tears. It is not even the threat of you leaving, because they have survived all of that before. Over and over, and each time they found a way back, and the one thing they cannot survive is your indifference. Because indifference cannot be argued with, cannot be guilt-tripped, cannot be seduced, cannot be threatened into changing its mind. Indifference simply is. It does not need to defend itself, and that is precisely why nothing they know how to do can touch it. Every weapon they have ever used against you was built to work on someone who still cared what they thought. The day you stop caring, every single one of those weapons becomes nothing more than noise in an empty room. Here is something worth naming clearly, because it deserves to be said without softening it. You were never broken for loving someone who could not love you back the way you needed. You were never foolish for believing the beginning was real, because in a strange way for them, it probably was the closest thing to real they know how to feel, even if it could not survive contact with your actual needs. You were never weak for staying as long as you did, because leaving something that has convinced you it is the only safety you have ever known takes a particular kind of courage that people who have never lived it will never fully understand. Every single thing you have been carrying as shame actually belongs in a different category entirely. It belongs in the category of evidence. Evidence that you were capable of a depth of loyalty and love that they could only take from, never build for themselves. Now, contrast that with what is happening to them right now, in this exact moment, whether or not you can see it. Somewhere they are noticing that the old tricks are not landing the way they used to. Somewhere the silence they used to control you with is now just silence, and it belongs to you. And you are using it comfortably, without flinching. Somewhere, the rage they used to summon on command is meeting a version of you that simply does not react anymore. And reacting to nothing is the one skill their entire identity was never built to survive. This is not because you found some clever trick or perfect comeback. It is because you healed, and healed people are simply unreachable in all the places manipulation used to have a door. There is a reason healed people are described as having an unshakable calm, and it has nothing to do with pretending everything is fine. It comes from finally trusting your own perception of reality again, after someone spent years trying to convince you that you could not trust it at all. It comes from setting a boundary and feeling no need to explain, justify, or apologize for it, because you finally understand that a boundary is simply the truth of what you will and will not accept, and truth does not require permission. It comes from realizing that self-respect, quiet, private, unannounced self-respect, is the most devastating weapon you will ever own, precisely because it was never built to be a weapon at all. It is simply what happens when a person stops abandoning themselves to keep someone else comfortable. So here is what I want you to take from all of this. More than any list of signs, more than any explanation of why they do what they do. You do not need them to admit anything. You do not need the apology you have been waiting years for, because even if it came, it would not fix what happened, and some part of you already knows that. You do not need them to see the version of you standing here now, calm, whole, no longer available for old games. Because whether they see it or not changes absolutely nothing about the fact that it is true. Their recognition was never the missing piece. It only felt that way because for a long time their recognition was the only currency you were allowed to use to measure your own worth. You are allowed to stop measuring yourself that way. You are allowed to decide quietly and without ceremony that your worth was never something they had the authority to assign in the first place. It was yours before you ever met them, and it remains yours now, untouched by anything they said or did, because worth is not the kind of thing that can actually be taken. It can only be forgotten temporarily by the person who owns it. And you are remembering it now, one boundary, one quiet evening, one uninterrupted night of sleep at a time. If any part of this reached you tonight, I want you to do one simple thing before you go. Not for me, not for this channel, but for yourself. Or say it out loud, even quietly, even just once. I am not who they said I was. Because the moment you say that and actually mean it, something shifts permanently, and it does not shift back. The version of you that survived all of this is not the leftover version, the damaged version, the version that needs fixing before she is worthy of anything good. She is the strongest version of you that has ever existed, forged in exactly the fire that was supposed to destroy her, and somehow did not. And whatever spirit thought it could live inside you forever, feeding quietly in the dark, is finding out right now, in real time, that it never actually owned the house. It was only ever a guest. And you have every single right in this entire world to finally, calmly, permanently ask it to leave.